Yeah, there's some libertarian candidates for president and just libertarian thinkers that had a nice thought experiment of possibly legalizing, or have spoken about possibly legalizing basically all drugs. In your intuition, do you think a world where all drugs are legal is a safer world or a less safe world for the users of those drugs?
It really depends on what we mean by legalization. So this is one of my beefs with this, how these things are talked about. I mean, we have very few completely laissez-faire, legal drugs. So even caffeine is one of the few examples. So for example, caffeine in tea and coffee is in that realm. Like there's no limits, no one's testing, there's no laws, regulation at any level of how much caffeine you're allowed to buy or how much in the price. But even like with this Starbucks like Nitro, there are rules with soda and with canned products. You can only put so much
in there. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is FDA regulated, and it's kind of weird because there's a limit to sodas that's not there for energy drinks and other things. So, but so even caffeine, it depends on what product we're talking about. Like if you're like NoDoz and other caffeine products over the counter, like you can't just put 800 milligrams in there. The pills are like 100 or 200 milligrams. And so it's FDA regulated as an over-the-counter drug. Some of the most dangerous drugs in society, I would say arguably one of the most dangerous classes of drugs are the volatile anesthetics, huffing. People huffing gasoline and, airplane glue, toluene, whatnot, severely damaging to the nervous system. Pretty much legal, but there's some regulation in the sense that there's a warning label, like it's illegal to do it for, not that it necessarily, they're busting people for this, but it's against federal law to use this in a way other than intended type of thing. Basically saying like, yeah, don't huff this, your paint thinner or whatnot. At least keeps people from selling it for that. Like, no, because they're gonna go after that person. They're not gonna be able to find the 12-year-old who's huffing.
Yes.
So anyway, just as some extreme examples at the end, and then, even the so-called illegal, like Schedule 1 drugs, psilocybin, we do plenty in terms of Schedule 2, which is ironically less restricted than psilocybin, but methamphetamine and cocaine I've done human research with. My research has been legal. So they're scheduled compounds, but they're not completely illegal. Like you can do research with them with the appropriate licenses and approval. So there really is no such thing. And like alcohol, well, it's illegal if you're 12 years old or 18 years old or 20 years old. And for anyone, it's illegal to be drinking it while you're driving. So there's always a nuance.
There's rules,
it's not
right?
Dichotomy.
And I actually should admit, it's been on my to-do list for a while to buy in Massachusetts some like edible or buy weed legally. I haven't done that in Massachusetts, let's put it this way. And I wonder what that experience is like, because I think it's fully legal in Massachusetts, and so I wonder what legal drugs look like. To me, I grew up with even weed being like, not, it's like this forbidden thing, not forbidden, but it's illegal. Most people, of course, I never partook, but most people I knew would attain it illegally. And so that big switch that's been happening across the country, there's like federal stuff going on to make marijuana legal federally. I'm half paying attention.
There's some movement there. I mean, the House passed a bill that's not going to be passed by the Senate, but yeah, it's progress.
There's clearly a change
right. It's moving in a trend.
So that's the example of a drug that used to be illegal and is now becoming more and more and more legal. So like, I wonder what like cocaine being legal looks like.
Right.
What a society with cocaine being legal looks like. The rules around it, the processes in which you can consume it in a safer way and be more educated about its consequences, be able to control dose and like purity much better, be able to get help for overdose. I don't know, all those kinds of things. Right. It does, in a utopian sense, feel like legalizing drugs at least should be talked about and considered versus keeping them in the dark.
I agree.
But yeah, so that in your sense, it's possible that in 50 years we legalize all drugs and it makes for a better world.
The way I like to talk about it is that I would say that it's possible, and it would probably be a good thing if we regulate all drugs.
How would you regulate like cocaine, for example? Is there ideas there?
So yeah, and you were already, going, where I was going with that kind of first. I described how there's always a nuance, and even like the cannabis in Massachusetts, federally illegal. So for example, if I was and I have colleagues that do cannabis research where they get people high in the lab. Like you're a federal funded researcher with NIH funds, you can't get that stuff from the dispensary because you're breaking a federal law. Even though the feds don't have the resources to go after, they don't want the controversy at this point to go after the individual users or even the sellers in those legal states. So there's always this nuance, but it's about the right regulation. So I think we already know enough that, for example, like I think safe injection sites for hard drugs makes a lot of sense. Like I wouldn't want heroin and cocaine at the convenience stores. And I don't think, maybe there's some extreme libertarians that want that. I think even the folks that identify as libertarians, probably most of them don't. Well, I don't know. Like not all of them want that, I think, that as a form of regulation, like, look, if you're using these hard drugs on a regular basis, you're putting yourself at risk for lethal overdose. You're putting yourself at risk for catching HIV and hepatitis. If you're going to do it, if you're doing it anyway, come to this place where at least you're not like, like pulling the water out of like, the puddle on the side of the street.
Yeah, so it's done by professionals, and those professionals are able to educate you also. So like a 7-Eleven clerk may not be both capable of helping you to inject the drug properly, but also won't be equipped to educate you but the negative consequences, all those kinds of things.
That's a huge part of it, the education. But then I think with the opioids, like the big part of it is just like, with naloxone, which is an antagonist, it goes into the receptor. It's called Narcan. That's the trade name, but it's what they revive people on an opioid overdose. That's almost completely effective. Like if there's a medical professional there and someone's ODing on an opioid, they're virtually guaranteed to live. Like that's remarkable. That if 100% at the opioid crisis, if all of those people right now that are dying were doing that in the presence of a medical professional, like even like a nurse, with Narcan, there'd be almost no deaths. There's always some exceptions, but, almost no deaths. Like that's staggering to me. So the idea that people are doing this, that we could have that level of positive effect without encouraging the drug. And this is where like you get into this like terrain of like sending the wrong message. And it's like, no, you can do that. You can say like, we're not encouraging this. In fact, probably one of the greatest advertisements for not getting hooked on heroin is like visiting a methadone clinic, visiting a safe injection site. Like this is not like an advertisement for getting hooked on this drug, but knowing that we can save people. Now you have a landscape here because a lot of times it's just like supervised injection, but you bring your own stuff. You bring your own heroin, which could still be, dirty and filled with fentanyl and fentanyl derivatives, which because of the incredible potency and the more difficulty measuring it, and some differences at the receptor, like you are more likely on average to lethally overdose on it. So you could, the level that's been more explored in Switzerland is in some places is you actually provide the drug itself and you supervise the injection. So I don't
Do you like that idea?
Yeah, public health data are completely on the side of there's really no credible evidence to this. If we allow that, we're sending the wrong message and everyone's going to, I'm not showing up. Like, and it's different by drug. Like, yeah, you legalize, you set up cannabis shops and some people are going to say it's legal, I'm going to go there. I don't think a whole lot of people are going to go to one of these places and say, I'm going to shoot up heroin for the first time. And even if it's a country of 300 million people, like even if someone does that, you have to compare this to the everyday people are dying from opioid overdoses. Like people's kids, people's uncles, these are real lives that are being shattered. So you just look at that. And then the other thing, and I know this from having done residential, even like non-treatment research where we just have a cocaine user or something stay on our inpatient ward for a month and you really get to know them. And sometimes you see, like, oftentimes that's the first time this person has had a discussion with a medical professional, any type of professional in their entire life around their drug use. Yeah. Even if they're not looking to quit. And it's like, you could imagine that in these safe injection settings where it's like, it might be a year into treatment and they're like, Doc, I know you're not the cops. Like, you really care for me. Like,
Yeah.
I think I'm ready to try that methadone thing. I think I'm really, I
Just
think I want to be done.
conversation about it. Yeah.
Yeah, they get to trust the people and realize that they're there because they truly, like, they have a compassion, a love for this community, like, as human beings, and they don't want people to die. And you get real human connections, and again, like, those are the conditions where people are going to ultimately seek treatment, and not everyone always will, but you're going to get that, and then you're going to get people, like, looking into treatment options. Sometimes, maybe it's years into the treatment. So it's like there's just all of these indirect benefits that I think at that level, I don't know if you'd call that legalizing. I think again, at least well regulated.
Right. Whatever that word is. Yeah, well regulated, but out in the open.
Right. Minimizing as many harms as we can, while not encouraging. I mean, we don't encourage people to drink people die every year from caffeine overdose. Like, and there's different ways to, like, just by allowing something doesn't mean we're sending the message that, by saying we're not going to give you a felony, which is actually often the penalty for psychedelics. I just actually testified for the Judiciary Committee, the Senate, the Assembly in New Jersey. And just to move psilocybin from a felony to misdemeanor. They use different language in New Jersey. It's weird, but like the equivalent of felony and misdemeanor. And that was like 2 people didn't vote for that on this committee. Wow. Because it was one of them said it might be sending the wrong message. And it's like, a felony, I mean, there's real harms. Like, that's the scarlet letter the rest of your life. You're stuck at the lower ends of the employment ladder. You're not going to get, loans for education. All of this, maybe because of a stupid mistake you made once as a 19-year-old.
Yeah.
Doing something that, like, a presidential candidate could have done and admitted to and had no problem,
Yeah.